Hey everybody, this is the Marine. Now that it's winter time and the temperatures are plummeting, many people, which the post office calls snowbirds, are heading south for the winter. And those that stay will spend most of their time indoors. Wintertime is such a wonderful time to be outdoors, and because of the cold temperatures, many people are missing this great experience. I myself find it easier to stay warm in the wintertime than to stay cool in the summertime, especially during those hot, humid days. Now, I believe anyone can stay perfectly warm no matter what the temperatures are, even in those extreme cold temperatures, with the right and proper clothing. In this episode of How to Stay Warm in the Wintertime, we're going to look at the things that you need to know before you purchase any clothing, and what I believe to be the most important information called circulation versus insulation to help you keep warm in any situation. It's hard to believe, but your body holds up to 60,000 miles of blood vessels. Along with your heart and other muscles, they make up your circulatory system. Now, the reason why our hands and feet get cold in wintertime is because our body will prioritize keeping the core warm, which leads to a reduction of blood flow to our extremities. To warm up the extremities, we need to boost up that circulation of warm blood. All that may sound good, but how do we accomplish this in the frigid temperatures? Well, let's start off with the feet, which I believe is the #1 problem. And to understand this problem, I like to share a story. I have a friend that works at REI in the boot department, and he sold this person a pair of boots to watch her son play hockey in the cold arenas. She brought them back about 2 weeks later and said that the boots did not work, her feet were cold. And as he was trying to figure out what went wrong, he had the right pair of boots, enough insulation in there. She happened to mention that she had 2 thick pairs of socks on. Now, there was a problem. She made what I believe to be one of the biggest mistakes why people's feet get cold. Because the temperatures get really cold, we think if we put another pair of socks on that our feet will be a little bit warmer, but what happens is totally the opposite. Now, there's 2 reasons why your feet will end up getting cold. And the first one is because you put that extra pair of sock on, it ends up causing your boot to be tight around your foot, and it ends up slowing down the circulation of warm blood, or it could even cut it off, and that's why your toes get cold. And when you buy a pair of boots that is rated for cold temperatures, you really got to trust it. You don't need to help it out. And I really suggest when you buy a pair of boots, you don't buy it online, but go to a store, bring the thickest pair of sock that you're going to wear, and you put it on there, and you got to make sure that the boot is loose fitting, and you got to make sure your toe box up in front where your toes can wiggle real easily. There's a lot of room in that toe box. Walk around and make sure it's almost like a sloppy fitting in there. You don't want the boot too tight. Now, the second reason why your feet may get cold is by having these tight fitting boots, there's no room or gaps in there to trap that warm air. So you want a pair of boots that's loose fitting, and like I said earlier with that toe box, so you can move the foot and the toes around, which will help generate heat. Now, an example of that is the Mukluks. Mukluks have been around for centuries, and Will Steger has made them really popular with his expeditions to the North Poles and the Antarctic, and they really warm in extreme cold temperatures. Now, what makes the Mukluks so great, like these Steger Yukon, first they have moose hide, which is very breathable, and it takes all the moisture or the sweat out of your boot and keeps your feet dry, which is very important in the cold temperatures. And secondly, it has a rubber sole on the bottom, which is very flexible, which causes your feet to constantly move, which will boost the circulation and generate warm blood in your feet. Now, the next part of our body we struggle to keep warm is our hands and our fingers. And a piece of clothing I highly recommend that I've been using for many years now is a product called wristies. Let alone do I use them in the wintertime, but also in the spring and the summer, I will always have them in my backpack. And the reason why they work so well is because your wrist has many veins that are close to the surface, which brings warm blood to your hands and your fingers, which can be exposed between your gloves and the sleeve of your jacket. This way, the wristies will cover the wrist, which will provide warm blood to your fingers and help keep your hands warm. Now, the reverse is true. For runners that run in hot weather, to cool down their hands, they'll put cold water over their wrist. And what's great about these wristies, your fingers are exposed so you can do these little tasks that need the dexterity. And what I like to do when my hands get cold, I take a loose pair of fleece gloves and I'll put them over the wristies. And this will keep my hand nice and warm. Now when you put a pair of gloves over the wristies, you really want them really loose, again, to trap that warm air in there. You don't want them too tight to cut off that circulation to bring that warm blood into those fingertips. And what I do is when the temperatures really drop, I'll put on a loose fitting mitten. And this will keep my hand in the extreme cold temperatures. I have big hands and it took me a while to find a pair of mittens that fit. So make sure you bring your glove and your wristy and try on the mittens before you buy it. Otherwise, you'll cut off the circulation. This system will keep your hands nice and warm. There's an old saying, if your core is warm, then your hands and your feet will be warm. And that's where all this warm blood comes, to keep those extremities nice and toasty warm. A piece of clothing that is very important to keep that core warm is an outer layer, the jacket or a shell. And you want that loose fitting because you're going to have a base layer, and may have 2 mid layers in there, and you don't want it to restrict the blood flow going to your extremities. And also it'll help trap the air in there with that loose fitting in there. And I really suggest you get one size larger when you go to buy one. And when you go to buy this jacket, I would bring in the base layer and maybe even 2 mid layers, the most clothing you're gonna have on, and put that on to make sure it's loose fitting. Now I had this jacket at 35 below zero last year, which is a negative 40 Celsius, and this jacket kept me nice and toasty warm. So a nice loose jacket is very important to get that circulation going so your hands and your feet can stay nice and toasty warm. One last thing I'd like to talk about, hot drinks can warm you up from the inside out. But coffee drinkers are not going to like what I'm about to say, unless you're drinking decaffeinated. Caffeine constricts blood vessels and decreases peripheral circulation. What? I never knew that. So be sure to avoid drinking excessive caffeine or sugary drinks. Thank you, sir, for that information. Now I'd like to share with you 2 types of food that's been known to increase circulation and blood flow. And the first one is cayenne pepper. Instead of using a salt shaker or a pepper shaker, consider using cayenne pepper to add flavor to your food. And the next one is fresh ginger, either grated, chopped, or sliced. You can add that to your food or tea. And it's also been known to gently easing the symptoms of frostbite. Now in the next episode of How to Stay Warm in the Wintertime, we're going to look at the different types of clothing and how to layer them. I have done other episodes like how to keep your hands warm in the winter times and how to keep the feet warm, and also winter boots, which ones to buy. If you have any questions or comments, please write them down below. I'd love to hear from you. This is the Marine. Thank you for watching, and God bless.